Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This week's presentation is on annuals, perennials, and bulbs. Our speaker is Jan Rice, who's a Master Gardener here in Prince William County. Again, if you have questions, just put them in the chat box and we'll get to them at the end. With that, take it away, Jan.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our presentation on annuals, perennials, and bulbs. I'm going to start out with some best practices, and then we'll go on to some pictures of some attractive plants. But the first thing everyone has to consider, and it's our mantra in Master Gardeners, right plant, right place. When plants are happy, they will do well. So select plants that fit the environment, because you can't change the environment to fit the plant. You can change the soil pH, but you're pretty much, unless you're going to cut down a tree, you're not going to get rid of shade. And sorry, that's my clock telling me it's 11, but late. Correct, the soil type is important, and you can adjust the pH, but you probably can't change clay. From clay, you can add some soil amendments, but so you want to start with disease and insect-free plants, whether you get them from a friend or whether you get them from a nursery. You're going to maintain the plant health by meeting the cultural requirements with the goal of using less pesticides. And the picture you see in the corner is my crazy garden in the middle of the summer, and those plants are so happy there. Now, best practices include testing the soil and fertilizing based on the soil test results. Don't just assume that you have an acid soil. You might not. Determine the soil drainage capacity before you plant, and the best way to do that is dig a hole and then pour water in it and kind of watch what happens. If it just sits there and doesn't drain away, you know you've got a drainage problem. And don't add sand to clay soil thinking that that's going to change the drainage. It probably won't and might create more of a mess. Use compost, and compost is very good for helping improve the drainage, and you want to add it to the entire bed rather than just sticking it in the hole with the plant that you're planting. If you mulch, and you don't necessarily need to, you want to use no more than 2 inches, because more than 2 inches can create a mat which will prevent water from getting to the roots. But mulch does conserve water, suppress weeds, and reduce soil erosion, especially if you're on a slope. But then on the other hand, the mulch can wash off. So you want to irrigate deeply and infrequently, about 1 inch a week. And I recommend you get a rain gauge. You can get them very cheaply, $2, $3 for a plastic one, or you can spend a lot of money for bigger, prettier ones. Now, soil tests, if you live here in Prince William County, you can get one by emailing the Master Gardeners. And I created a handout, which you will get at some point, which has this information on it. Prince William County will mail the kit to you, and then you mail it to Virginia Tech for $10 a sample plus postage. If you don't want to contact us, you can go to the Virginia Tech soil testing website, and you can download the form and then mail it into them directly. If you live in another county in Virginia, you need to check with your local extension office, or again, you could go directly to Virginia Tech's website. If you're not in Virginia, then you need to connect with your state extension office. So this is another one of our mantras: choose native plants. Now, this is not a presentation on native plants, so I don't have complete native plants in this presentation, but these are 2 excellent resources I highly recommend reading. Bringing Nature Home by Doug Ptolemy, which gives you a complete explanation of why native plants are so important for nature. And then, of course, Plant Nova Natives has this downloadable booklet, Native Plants for Northern Virginia. And the short form is that they're more likely to thrive. They provide food and shelter. They maintain and improve the soil fertility. They have large root systems, which help them survive. And they require less fertilizer and pesticides. That's another one of our mantras. They can be aggressive, but most are not. They're pretty easy to control if you kind of get the seed heads before they explode. Now, when to plant here in Prince William County, we're in zones 7A and 7B. Our average frost is in May, but our weather is crazy. You could have it early May, you could have it late May. So watch the weather. There is no definite time when the last frost is over, usually by June. But the average first frost is in October, usually mid-October. But again, crazy weather, could have it earlier. If it's a tender annual or perennial and you haven't hardened it off, and I'll talk in a few minutes about what hardening off means, then you want to definitely plant it after the last frost. And this is not about vegetables, but definitely tomatoes. You don't want your tomatoes caught out with a late frost. And refer to the hardiness map for the zones if you don't live in our area. Now, bed preparation, you need a water source. You need to remove weeds and debris and disturb the soil as little as possible, because when you pull up weeds, you can be pulling up seeds from deep within the seed bed. And you want to plant away from the shallow rooted trees and shrubs, because you don't be digging in and damage the shrubs. So choose a suitable site for each plant: the sun, shade, wet, dry, the same things we talked about earlier. You're going to lay out your plants, staggering them, planting them in drifts, and plant while the soil is moist, but not saturated. So you want to plant early in the morning or in the evening when it's cooler. If you set them out in the middle of the day, especially when it gets pretty hot, then the plants can wilt and they can struggle to absorb the water. You want to water them in immediately. And I really recommend compost versus mulch, not to say that you shouldn't ever use mulch, but what I find with my plants, and again, this is a little tiny patch of my side garden next to my neighbor's driveway, which gets a lot of heat and struggles, so the tick seed and the nepeta do pretty well there. And I don't bother with mulch. I just put them in and they grow together, and then I don't even need it, but I do put compost around them. So planting, more information, always wider than your plant and shallow. Notice the diagram at the bottom shows how if you plant it too deeply, the crown won't be above the level of the soil, and that can promote crown rot, among other problems. So dig your hole carefully and then check that it's not too deep. And also, if you try to fill in with loose soil, it's just going to sink. So create your hole carefully. Now, if it's a peat pot, you can just plant it, but remove the edge so the entire pot is underneath the soil. If, as this lovely illustration shows, the plant is extremely root bound, you want to shear away those roots and then kind of spread them out so they have a chance to survive. Otherwise, I have actually seen instances in my neighborhood where things have been planted like this. They're just plunked in the ground. And months and months later, you can literally just pull them up straight up and the roots have not gone anywhere. And then after you put it in the hole, you want to backfill with soil, press it down, and of course, water. So what's an annual? An annual is any plant that completes its entire life cycle in one season. Now, this could include tropical perennial flowers that are going to be killed by the cold temperatures in our area. And so you want to know, even if it says it's a perennial, is it a perennial where I live? And they replace themselves, you need to sow them from seed yearly or replace them yearly. Some varieties naturally reseed themselves. Cosmos is one of them that just sort of spreads everywhere, and I'll show you that one in a minute. And annuals, advantages and disadvantages. You can experiment with height, color, and texture every year. You can change up your garden. They're versatile, sturdy, relatively cheap, and easy to grow. And there are both cool season and warm season varieties, so you can change them out as the season changes. The disadvantage is that seeding thing, they may land where you don't want them. And self-sown plants may not be the same as the parent. So if it's a hybrid, the seeds may not retain some of the characteristics that you had wanted from the original plant. And they need continuous deadheading. And I didn't put this in, but if you're a gardener like me who really doesn't want to go out and replant halfway through the year, I'm very happy with my perennials. So the culture and maintenance, you want to walk through your garden regularly. The experts say daily, but if you're busy, that may not happen. And you want to monitor them for problems and catch them quickly. You can remove pests by hand or mechanically, and that helps you avoid using herbicides and pesticides. And one of the reasons for avoiding herbicides and pesticides is that if you use herbicides on one plant, it can transfer to another. You can kill more than you intended. And pesticides, you may kill off the good bugs, which are busy eating the bad bugs. So you may create more of a problem than solving a problem. You want to remove infected plants quickly, and that to control the spread of disease. And if you see an annual that's dying, don't waste time. Just get rid of it. It's not going to live past the season anyway. And then that gives you an opportunity to stick in a nice perennial. That works. Longevity depends on good soil, moisture, and drainage. Now, plant your seedlings after last frost. And hardening off means that you gradually increase the time outside. So it's, say if it's a warm afternoon, you take it out, put it on your deck, and then if it's going to get cold that night, bring it in. This can be, I know it takes a lot of time, but it does allow plants to improve their vigor by exposing them to more light than they'd have in the house and to slightly cooler temperatures, because they may be, if they're in your home, they may be getting used to very warm temperatures, and then that can cause a shock when you put them outside. And if it's seeds, you sow them according to the package directions. So here's a few that I think most people are familiar with: cool season annuals, the calendula, the pinks, the flowering cabbage, which of course is a fall one, pansies, which everybody loves. You can put those in the fall or the spring, but they're going to kick the bucket once it gets too hot. And snapdragons they usually last quite a bit longer, but you can get a lot of color and variety out of these plants. And then the primrose is another one.
Can I interrupt this for a second?
Yes.
One of the things we found in the garden last year was that if a lot of people will take their snapdragons out or cut their snapdragons down after they've flowered. If you let them go over the summer, you can still get a rebloom in the fall.
Yes, I'm going to emphasize that's true of other plants too. And if I'm going to talk a little bit later about what's called the Chelsea chop and ways to get more blooms out of perennials as well as annuals, and mostly used for perennials. But it's only if they're dying you want to give up on them, but if there's ways to keep them blooming longer. So petunias are a favorite. They lots and lots of varieties. There's something called the supertunia, which I had not heard of until I did this research. And of course, marigolds provide you with lots of color. And don't forget cool colors, because cool colors can be a nice soothing complement to other colors. And Dusty Miller is an example of that. So here's some more examples of some bright colors: celosia, cleome, coleus. And I want to say I'm a person who grew up in the 50s, and there wasn't a single garden that I knew that didn't include at least one of these as pops of color. And I think they go in and out of fashion, but these can provide definite bright spots. Portulaca, zinnia, salvia, and I added this salvia lyrata, and I'm not actually sure whether that one's a perennial or an annual, but it is a native, so I put it in counterpoint to the hybrids are going to grow bigger and more vigorously, but this salvia lyrata, I have this in my garden, and it provides it's a nice sweet little plant. Some warm season annuals, cosmos, and I put a couple of colors there, and then you can see what it looks like when it goes to seed, and that will just seed everywhere. It's fun because it pops up where you weren't expecting it. The cardinal flower is a native one, and then Tithonia, the Mexican sunflower, is another. These are some more that you can plant them in the garden, but they often do really well in pots. And so don't forget containers as a way to have annuals that will provide you with spots of color at times when your perennials are kind of looking a little bedraggled. And these work well in pots, Calibrachoa, the begonia, and the geraniums. And again, just a huge variety of colors, shapes, and sizes. These also go in containers. You want to have your filler, and your spiller. And sweet potato vines make a great spiller, and they come in all different colors. And then lantana is another one. The butterflies just love lantana. They'll be floating around you. And then there's this euphorbia, which creates kind of like a fountain of flowers, the diamond frost. Moving on to biennials. A biennial is sort of a midway between an annual and a perennial. Its life cycle is 2 years. So in the first year, you get a small rosette of leaves right near the soil surface. And then the second season's growth, the stem, flower, and seeds grow and form, and then it will die at the end of its second year. But the great thing about these is they do reseed themselves, and if you have them for a couple of years, then you're going to have some plants that grow. You'll have some that are in first season growth and first year growth, and some that are in second year growth. And a couple of examples of this is the hollyhock and the campanula. And again, this one, I just love the Canterbury bells. And you can get them continuous. Now, another favorite of mine is the California poppy. It is not native to our area. It's native to California. The forget-me-not and foxglove is another biennial, but it is highly toxic. So if you have pets or children, that might not be a good choice for you. More biennials is the stock, the sweet William, and the money plant. Now I used to have money plant in the garden, and it spreads like crazy if it's happy. But it's fun because it has these different stages, and you can bring in the dried stalks in the winter, and they make excellent flower arrangements. They're excellent additions to flower arrangements. Now on to perennials. These are things that grow back year after year from their original roots. Leaves, stems, and flowers will die back at the frost. The roots survive the winter, and you get new stems, leaves, and flowers every spring. Now, hardy perennials are those that can live through the winter in your hardiness zone. And then there are tender perennials that in our particular zone will not survive through the winter, and you have to dig up the roots or protect them in some way. You grow them as annuals in colder zones than their native climate, and that can be a chore to dig them up. So advantages and disadvantages: you can replace your perennials only every few years or so as you feel like it. You don't have to do it every year. As one variety finishes, you can have another one blooming, and you don't have to deadhead unless, as Thomas said, you want to you just want to lower them so that they can bloom again later in the season. And some do that and some don't. So you check each variety. Disadvantage in maintenance to keep them attractive, their short bloom periods, and the fact that you need to provide an early, mid-season, and late blooming varieties in a mix in order to keep your garden blooming. Perennials, culture and maintenance, you want to plant them either in early spring or fall to allow them to establish. In the fall, it's a good time to plant them in fall because their roots will grow strong during the winter, and you want to give them enough time before that first frost. So September is probably a good time to plant. It's after the heat, and it's a time when hopefully you get more water, not this year, but some years. And then you want to provide organic matter. Again, same thing as annuals. It depends on the soil, moisture, and drainage, how well it does. And you can mulch to control the weeds, or you can hand pull the weeds. And again, water deeply 1 inch a week, and remove diseased parts to control spread. And only remove insects if damage is severe, because you want to provide food for the good bugs so that they will thrive in your garden. These are some perennials for drier spots. The penstemon is a native. The purple coneflower, and Leslie, jump in here if I've got the wrong one, I think is the native one. And tickseed is a native one. There are many different varieties. They're hybrids, so you can.
Jan,
yeah.
the purple coneflower is a native, but it's not native to Northern Virginia.
Okay, I get confused on that sometimes.
I know, that's okay.
So Amsonia is another one, and I love Amsonia because in the fall it looks gorgeous, like this second picture. In the spring it has these little light blue blooms, and then there's blanket flower as another one that provides a sunny face on a gray day. Baptisia is a native, and the white yarrow is native, but there are other colors of yarrow. There's hybrid varieties. And then creeping stonecrop, I believe, is a native. There's certain ones that are native and certain ones are not. So you need to check carefully if you want to get more natives in your garden. Russian sage is a salvia that's not native. And autumn joy sedum is another one, provides several seasons of color. I love the fall, the look of the flowers in the fall when they turn bright orange, but it's not a native. Now, a few of these, the asters, again, some of the asters are native, some are not. And so check carefully if you're looking for them. And then Rudbeckia, there's some natives. And these are, I put in two different pictures here to show you how they can look very close, the different varieties. So you do want to look at how they're going to look as they grow, because you might like this more dense formation and you might like a more widespread look. So do your homework is my best advice. And Nepeta, one of my favorites because it attracts butterflies and bees, but it can grow, can spread a lot. It's a very hardy one that'll tolerate, it tolerates a variety of conditions. The wild columbine is the native one on the right, and then this is a hybrid columbine in the center. It's another one, it blooms just in the spring. It's almost an ephemeral because when it gets hot, it tends to kind of die back. Some more perennials for sun to part shade, the Shasta daisy, and then this is mixed with the butterfly weed, which is, I believe, a native, and then cranesbill and larkspur, just to show you a few different color varieties. The false goat's beard, the stilby, I believe, is a native, and then garden phlox and creeping phlox. Again, they're hybrids, and then there's some native varieties, so you want to look at those carefully if you're planning to plant for natives. The peony, of course, is Japanese, but sometimes it provides a beautiful pop of a big bloom if you have a space where you want large blooms. Now, shades, the hellebore. Lily of the valley, which is highly poisonous, again, think carefully, and it blooms in the spring around May, I think, and then it kind of dies back. And hostas, if you have deer, hostas are deer candy, so among other things. Petunias are another one that's deer candy. So if you have deer, then you want to think about how can I protect them from the deer. Sweet woodruff is a native. Green and gold is a native. Thumflower, this is my sister's very favorite. She has this all over her shady garden, and it really does look beautiful in the spring, and then the leaves look good for a long time. Bleeding heart is one that looks really good in the spring, but it tends to die back. So it's one that you want to put where you have some other things for later in the season when it dies back and doesn't look as attractive. Green and gold is very shallow rooted, so I have found no problems with growing that around trees and shrubs, and it spreads wonderfully once it gets established. It does require shade, though. It really doesn't flourish in the sun. I have some that's in morning sun, so as long as it isn't in sun too long, it will survive. Here's some more moist shade ones. One of my favorite words is spring ephemerals. A bluebell is a spring ephemeral. It will disappear completely once it warms up in the spring. It's a native. Wild ginger and white turtlehead are natives. Heuchera, there is a native version, but this picture, probably none of these are natives. They've bred them so they have all kinds of colors. And so that's, again, you can mix and match if you want to throw in a few of the hybrids to bring certain colors to your garden. It's a really nice way to provide colors, and it looks pretty good until it really hits frost. I mentioned the Chelsea Trop earlier. This is based on the famous Chelsea Garden Show, which is on my bucket list, but the Chelsea Trop is developed to keep leggy, tall perennials from getting out of control. As you notice in my garden, I don't do that, and mine do get out of control. But what you do is you chop back a third to a half. And I would probably say the first time you do it, do a third just to see how that plant responds. You can do it two ways. You can do it by cutting it straight across so it becomes a shorter mounded plant, or you can do it by cutting just half the stems back. And that provides different heights and different interest within the plant. It delays flowering and it helps control the size. And you do it in May to June for summer bloomers, and late fall bloomers you're going to wait till later in the summer to do. And there's an article in Fine Gardening if you wanted to look it up to get more details. Moving on to geophytes, also known as bulbs. So geophytes are herbaceous plants with an underground storage organ that can include bulbs, corms, tubers, roots, and rhizomes. They are compressed leaves, stems, and flowers, and these are just a few diagrams I found to show you sort of what the parts are. Now, a bulb is a short, flattened stem with fleshy food storage leaves. That's a lily, narcissus, and tulip. The corm is a solid, vertical underground stem with a bud on the top, and it has dry leaf bases. That's a crocus and the gladioli. The tuber corm is disc-shaped structure with buds on top and roots below, and I have a picture there to show you what it looks like. It can be the tuberous begonia, the ranunculus, and anemone. And the tuberous root is the dahlia, which has a swollen root used for food storage. And I would also say that I found some evidence that says ranunculus is invasive, so do a little homework on that. It was just a passing thing that I found. So rhizomes are thickened underground stems that grow horizontally at or below the soil surface. And this diagram sort of shows you how it looks. The canna is an example of this, and the iris is an example of this. And the canna is non-hardy, the iris is hardy in our area. This is some of the same information you've heard before. You want plump, firm bulbs. Choose deer and squirrel resistant varieties if you have a problem with that. If you have a fence and the deer can't get in, that's great, but squirrel can get in under anything. You want to store them in a cool, dry place while you're waiting to plant them. And best time for planting bulbs is actually in the fall. You want to deadhead after the flower fades, but wait until the foliage dies to cut it back. So that means you can just, so if your daffodil dies, the vine, just cut that one stem and leave everything else till it dies back, and then plant something in front if it looks too ugly for you. So you want to do the correct depth. And I showed here an example of a planting tool that makes it easier. There are tons of them. You can look it up online. But it makes it easier. And these tools usually have the inches on them, so you can just plunge it into the correct depth. And that gets your hole just right for that bulb. You want to water only during dry weather. These things store water, so you don't want to overwater and rot them. You can dig them up and store them or divide them in the fall if you want to, depending on the hardiness of the bulb. And fertilizer tends to burn tender plants as they come up. So if you have fertilized, if you're using compost, you're good. But if you're using fertilizer, you want to be careful not to over fertilize. I just pulled this off the internet to kind of show you the wide variety of bulbs there are and how different plants need to be planted at different depths. Don't go by one of these charts. You want to look at the individual plant that you buy If you get it from a neighbor, you can look it up on a reputable source for how deep to plant that particular bulb. So these are the tender ones that you're going to have to dig up: the begonias, dahlias, gladioli, the cannas. Now, I have to say that I have had cannas that survived. They were planted right next to the patio which got a lot of sun in the winter, and it was a mild winter. I intended to dig them up to get to it, and they did survive. So, but again, you're taking a chance. Is this going to be one of those winters where you get a huge, really deep frost and that'll get them? Or are they in a sunny enough protected location that they're going to survive? So you can sort of make that determination yourself. When you dig them up, you do want to put them in a medium such as peat moss that is damp but not wet. You don't want them to dry out. That's the tricky thing. You don't want them to dry out. You don't want them to rot. And they should be in a cool location such as a garage or a basement where they're not exposed to a lot of your regular heat in the house. These are hardier ones. The woodland crocus is native. The liatris is native. Then there's snowdrops, winter aconite, and summer snowflakes. And I can honestly say I have summer snowflakes at my other house, and they spread everywhere. You can dig them up and give them to your friends. Hardy bulbs include the tulip. And again, tulips are deer candy. I had a neighbor who said, I can protect my tulips. I put hair around them. And the first year he did that, protected them just fine. Second year, the deer went, oh, nothing happened. I'll have these for lunch. And they were all gone. So be aware, there are lots of things you can do to protect your plants from deer, but they become very accustomed to what's around them. There are some commercial products that are used in the teaching garden that are very helpful. They smell and keep deer away, but again, they can get used to them. So you have to switch up your game. Narcissus, that's daffodils, jonquils, paper whites are another one. And the hyacinth, one of my favorites, and the Turk's cap, which is the native. And then the stargazer, that's my daughter's favorite. That's a hybrid, it's not a native one. And I have a little poem here to share with you that I learned this in college, and it's still my favorite. If of thy mortal goods thou art bereft, and from thy slender store 2 loaves alone to thee are left, sell one, and with the dole buy hyacinths to feed thy soul. And that's from a 13th century Persian poet. And I think especially in times like this, you can tell it makes me emotional. I think it's important to remember how much flowers can feed your soul. So something less feed the soulish, but also important, are ornamental grasses. And monocots, true grasses, sedges, and rushes. Most of these are perennials in our zone. The seed heads provide food for birds. The dried stem shelter insects. And just remember, insects are a vital, important part of our of the environment for everything. Birds need them for food, and we need the good ones to kill the bad ones. Bunch grasses are important habitat for ground beetles, another very essential part of our environment because they break down the soil. They break down rotten wood and create soil. Extensive root systems aerate the ground. And my least favorite reason is architectural interest, but felt I had to add that. Here's some natives, Carex pennsylvanica and Carex appalachia, which are sedges and require shade. And the sun part shade native is the Indian wood oats. This is an example of it in a very urban setting. My favorite, pink muhly grass. It's so stunning in the summer. Right now it's very brown, but it does provide that winter interest, but that summer burst of color. And then there's broom sedge, which I wouldn't even consider planting unless you have a large area that you want to create a meadow in, and it can be a part of your environment. But if you have a small yard like I do, it's probably not an important plant for you to put in. There's a smaller version called little blue stem. And then, and I'm not sure they're even related, but blue stems in the name, but the broom sedge, that was the one that was most common in fields, in wild fields. And switchgrass is another one. It grows in clumps. On to ferns. These are also herbaceous plants. They are non-flowering and they're hardy perennials, which means they do die back in the winter. So you may have some bare spots where they are. Some are evergreen, some are deciduous. They tolerate moist soil and some will take dry shade. Again, check the type of fern you're buying or getting from a friend. You may need to water them during dry spells. They can be very slow to emerge in the spring. I had some last year that I was completely convinced were gone, and then they magically emerged. So you want to plant them in the fall or very early spring for them to develop well, and divide them in early spring. If you have a tropical fern, it's probably best not to bother to put it in your garden because it's going to die off when it gets really cold. Put those in pots and then you can just bring them inside for the winter. Put them outside again next year. These are some native ones: the Christmas fern, the lady fern, the marginal wood fern, and the interrupted fern. And to be truly honest, when I see them in a garden, I have to get a picture to identify them because they have a lot of similar characteristics, but some of them have a more upright growth. Some of them have a sort of flatter look to them, and you have to depend on the look that you want to, like, pick one that has the look you want. The dreaded invasives. Number one on the enemy's hit list is English ivy. If you have that in your yard, you know how hard it is to control. Think of major and minor, which is known as periwinkle. Yellow flag iris. There are plenty of other iris that don't naturalize into the environment. Creeping liriope, that's in the picture. And that is, I think every builder puts that in front of every house. I know on my street, I've tried to eradicate mine. I think I've got it out, but my neighbor still has plenty. The ajuga, and I do have some of that. I think the purple flowers are really pretty in the spring, but I do monitor it carefully and pull it out and chop off the flowers after they're gone. Japanese knotweed is another one. Bamboo. Do not plant bamboo unless, and I know it's a grass, but unless you're ready for it to take over your entire yard, and you will never eradicate it. My mother-in-law had this, and I can't tell you how many hours we spent trying to eradicate it. If you want to plant bamboo, plant it in a pot on your patio, and then it's a nice screen, but it may not survive the winter. I'm not really sure about that, but don't plant it in your yard. Celandine is a pretty yellow flower, and I think it's native to Europe. It was all over Europe when I traveled there. But here it's invading native area, naturalized areas and crowding out native plants. The orange daylilies, out of control. You see it all along the highways. Creeping Jenny is one that's sold everywhere, and my neighbors have it. If you can monitor it and keep it under control, that's fine, but it is going to be difficult to control. And another one are the loose stripes. If you can go to the Virginia Department of Conservation, and there's a whole list, there's 90 of them. And I just picked a few that I thought were more common invasives. And there is a handout that you will get at some point, and this is on that there. Now, avoiding disease. This picture has powdery mildew, which is kind of typical if it doesn't get enough air circulation. It's probably not going to kill them, but it's unsightly. So diversifying what you plant helps prevent disease. If you have a monoculture, disease spreads very quickly. And roses are a prime example of that. If you have the rose that every builder sticks in every front yard, that's bound to get disease sooner or later. You want to pick ones that are resistant to diseases and insects and space them for good air circulation. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. You want to, sanitation is very important. Clean up dead leaves, flowers, and weeds, and keep your tools clean. You can transfer diseases from one plant to another with those tools. and you want to identify the disease and insects properly, contact your local extension office. That's us at Master Gardeners. So I actually didn't do that one time last year. I saw bugs on my crepe myrtle and I quickly squished it. And then I thought, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And I looked it up and it was bark scale and it's perfectly healthy for the plant. So lesson learned, won't do that next time. You always identify properly first. Most problems with plants are cultural or environmental, meaning they weren't planted in the right place and they didn't have the right conditions to thrive. And I can't repeat often enough, use insecticides and fungicides only when absolutely necessary. I personally don't use either one. And I find that I have a very healthy garden. I'm not saying everything survives. I'm not saying I don't have the occasional bad bug. I do. I try to take care of them as soon as I see them. But you can have a garden without using them. More common problems, the insects. This is not a program on insects. I just wanted to mention that here. Show the beautiful aphids in that picture. And this book, What's Wrong with My Plant, is an excellent source for you to check for organic remedies. The typical mites, aphids, caterpillars, beetles, mealybugs, leaf miners, slugs. Every garden is going to have them. If you have hostas, you're going to have slugs because they love the plants. They can hide under them and they will eat. My neighbor loves her hostas and hates the slugs, and I pick them off for her. There are diseases that plants get, leaf spot, mildew, etc. And again, some of these diseases, it's like humans. You can get a disease and survive it perfectly well if you're healthy. If you're not healthy, that disease can be more of a problem for you. So keeping your plants healthy is the biggest thing. And of course, animals, and I forgot to put voles on this, deer, squirrels, rabbits, voles. You can minimize this, of course, by planting deer-resistant plants, or if you are able to have a fence, that helps. Squirrels, a whole lot harder to control because they can get over anything. Rabbits can be managed by a fence, and you can again manage by having plants that do not attract the rabbits. Environmental conditions, stress, the water stress can be either way. It can be too little or too much. You can have the plant scorched by things like fertilizer. You can have too much or too little light. And I won't belabor the herbicides and pesticides point. So this is my backyard. Winter cleanup. You can see what I didn't do. So remove any diseased plants at any time, but especially in winter time when you're heading into spring. You want to decide whether you want to leave plants for winter interest, which I tend to do, or remove them. You also want to decide or get information on when it's proper to prune your shrubs and trees, because that's vital to their health. You don't want to prune your azaleas at the wrong time, because then you won't get any blooms the next year. That's true of hydrangeas and many other plants. And the fall is a good time, and wintertime is a good time to condition your soil with organic matter. So if you spread that when you don't have all the leaves out, it's very easy to just spread it around the plants, and that will increase the organisms in the compost, increase the aeration in your soil, and this makes for healthy plants. Because remember, plants don't just need the air above them, they need the air in the soil. Compacted soil is a huge problem for plants. So aerating, not necessarily by digging it up, but providing those organisms which will create the air in the soil is a way to create healthy soil. So that's my presentation. Here's some resources I mentioned. Our Master Gardener Help Desk is available 5 days a week, but you can email us anytime and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. .edu and .ext websites are a great resource. Don't feel that you can't do your own research, because you can. And North Carolina State Extension Plant Toolbox is one of my favorite tools for looking at plants. I researched each plant in this presentation. I can't tell you I learned everything that I read, but in each plant that's in their toolbox gives you extensive information about where it came from, its culture, what it needs to survive. The Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder is another good resource. And one of the reasons you can use this resource is because Missouri sits in zones 6 and 7, which is similar. We're zone 7. And many plants have a zone range that runs like 5 to 8. So things that grow well in Missouri will often grow well here. You do need to check that though. I mean, if you're using them as a resource, then double check it to see if it will grow well in our area as well. But if it says it'll grow in zone 7, you should be good. Virginia Tech Publications, this is our website for getting publications, but I will tell you that it's under construction right now and you may have some difficulty finding some of the publications. So my suggestion is if you're looking up a topic, you can't find something at Virginia Tech and you don't find it at other .edu websites, then send us something and we'll try and do some research and help you. If you're looking up, I should have said this, at the .edu websites, you do want to use ones that are nearby. In other words, don't choose California or Texas. We don't have the same climate, but you can use things like places like New York. They have excellent information, even though much of their climate is different. There are parts that are not that different from ours. So use your common sense. Pennsylvania's fine, Maryland's good, North Carolina's excellent, West Virginia's fine, but you don't want to choose an area that has a very different climate than we do. I mentioned already the Department of Conservation's invasive species list. And then I just threw this one in. This is a good, because we mentioned bulbs. So if you don't want to plant bulbs outside, you can definitely do them inside. This is not the time of year to do it, but if you like flowers in the winter, forcing some bulbs in the winter can definitely brighten your day. I want to thank you very much for attending today. And we have upcoming classes on trees, on turf and container gardening, and then the all-important pesticide safety for the home garden. I know I'm sort of anti-pesticides, but there are times when you're overwhelmed by a pest and it's needed. So, but if you're going to do it, either get a professional or know what you're doing before you start. So that's my PSA for pesticides. All right, questions? And
Well, it looks like the few questions that we had, Leslie answered in the chat. So if anybody has a question or want to unmute themselves and just go ahead and ask, feel free. Wow, that's always a good sign when nobody has any questions because you covered it so well.
it's that everybody knew it all before they get started.
I have a quick question. When's the best time to fertilize azaleas?
I'm going to defer to the experts on that because I personally just put compost down. When I had it, right now I don't have azaleas because I've switched over to natives and they're not native, but I do put some compost underneath my neighbor's azaleas. Can you tell my neighbor's not a gardener?
So I would ask the question, how old are your azaleas?
I have one that is, and it's not a hybrid. It's actually, it has a scent to it. It smells like, actually it smells like jasmine. They're probably about 40 years old.
Okay, generally speaking, a well-established shrub like that is not going to need fertilizer.
There are native azaleas, the flame, I think it's called the flame, and the native ones are deciduous. And I've had those in my garden before, and I agree with Thomas. I mean, the most I ever did was throw some compost, a light compost around them.
You can use compost, or, you know, if you're running into an issue with the azaleas where they're not producing as much flowers, then I would consider fertilizing them. But, and I would do that before flowering. But I'd get a soil test to see
Yes.
what nutrients you might be missing. You may only need to be adding phosphorus. You may only need to be adding potash. So that would be my recommendation.
All right, thank you. I've been using pine needles as a cover, as a mulch.
Mm-hmm.
That's very popular all across the South.
Okay, we've got a question on the chat. How do you grow bulbs indoors during the winter? Grow light and moist soil? Question mark.
I'm going to defer to send you to Virginia Tech and pull up that publication because it's got all the details. When I do it, I tend to do it with water and rocks. But again, I think there's a lot more to it than just throwing some rocks. I have a bowl and I throw rocks in, and then I stick the bulbs in, put a few more rocks, and then keep the water at a low level just around the roots. But there's many different ways to look at it. This publication is a long one, by the way, but it is an interesting read.
And I believe it depends a little bit on the bulb that you are
Yes.
trying to force.
Yes. Like paper whites, they're just so easy in water and rocks. I know you can do narcissus, but I've never, mostly because probably I just don't care. I've never tried to do daffodils or tulips that way.
I've seen where, you know, they sell hyacinths, which they come in that
Yes.
vase where, again, it's in water as well.
And so they even sell them now where they're covered in wax, and supposedly you don't have to do anything, but that's, my sister-in-law swears by those.
They charge them a little less than when it comes in a pretty pot.
Yes. And you can, if you go to garden centers, you can pick up, like, you know, individual bulbs. You don't have to buy those where it costs you $30 for the pot and the peat moss and everything to do it. Just have to have your own pots. Any other questions? I did prepare, I'm not sure, I sent it to our administrative aide. I'm not sure when it will go out. I honestly say that I was adding plants at the very last minute to this presentation. So I included a plant list and all the resources. And I also, because I had one done from a presentation in December that had information on tools and other things, I included all that. So it's just a list of resources for you. If it hasn't been sent out, it'll probably go out with the request for an evaluation.
And speaking of evaluation, the evaluation is really important for us because we are a public agency and we're responsible to both the state and Prince William County, and that helps show our accountability to both organizations. So we would really appreciate when you get the survey if you would go ahead and fill that out. Next week, the second, excuse me, our presentation is going to be on trees and shrubs. Next week also starts not next week, March 2nd is trees and shrub. And that's also the start of when we go back to weekly classes. Trees and shrubs will be followed by turf and weeds, and then container gardens, and then pesticide safety. So that's what's coming up in March. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Jan, for presenting, and we will see you next time.